You're listening to the Oddscast, the original UFC betting podcast that's straight to the point. Hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Kalikas and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. They provide you the absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting. MMAOddsBreaker.com. Don't place your wagers without us.
Welcome to the Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on ESPN Plus 28 event, which takes place in Brasilia, Brazil. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back, Kyle Marley won 2.2 units for UFC 248 after going 2-1 on his premium bets. Kyle has his bets and fantasy MMA picks available now on MMAOddsBreaker.com. Back to the present, UFC on ESPN Plus 28 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired exclusively on ESPN Plus this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on the preliminary card is a women's bantamweight contest between Veronica Macedo, who is 6-3-1, and B. Malecki, who is 1-0. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
As always, a couple quick shout-outs before we get rolling here. First off, our sponsor, Sportsbook, BetDSI.eu. Make sure you head over to BetDSI and check out all the lines. Those are the lines that I'm going to quote as far as updates go. And then also, as Brian mentioned, head over to MMAOddsBreaker.com, click on the Premium Picks tab, and check out Big Marley 3's plays. He has a couple plays for this weekend available, and he's got his DraftKings breakdown available as well. The guy is razor sharp. He's on a roll again, so make sure you hop on board. I mean, he's up over like 240 units the last 21 months or so, so it's been documented. The guy's legit. Make sure you hop on his bets right now. So head over to MMAOddsBreaker.com and click on that Premium Picks tab. Okay, getting right into this card. Should be a fun one. And starting off this card right now, the prelims, we have a fun women's fight actually, where Malecki actually opened the dog. So Macedo opened minus 160 as a favorite, Malecki plus 130 as an underdog. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is Macedo minus 172, the comeback of Malecki at plus 139. So again, line margins have tightened up a little bit. And we're seeing two-way action on this fight. And across the Dom Best screen, we're seeing about $160 plus 140 as well. So again, around 160, 170 seems to be the range right now for Macedo. This is a tough one as well. I mean, Macedo moving up from flyweight to bantamweight in this spot here. Malecki is going to be the physically bigger fighter. I believe she's going to have 10 pure inches of reach over Macedo. So we got to get that out of the way as well. But overall, I think this is still going to be a very good fight. I think Macedo is actually the better overall fighter. I think Macedo is going to have some speed. She has some power. I think she's a little bit underrated in this spot here. I think both of these ladies can have success on the feet here. It'll go back and forth a little bit. Obviously, Malecki going to have to use her range. She's going to have quite a bit of it there. But I think Macedo is quick enough to get inside and close a gap on her and land often enough to make things interesting as well. And then on the ground, I think Macedo is actually the better ground practitioner as well. I mean, so far, it hasn't been the greatest resume for, her UFC career thus far for Macedo, but I think people are kind of underestimating her a little bit, and she is getting better. So Malecki, I get it. She's kind of the trendy side overall. I mean, I think there's a lot of upside to her. Again, with that build, she's going to get better. She's got that big size and that frame, and she does have some skill. She's not bad on the feet. I do wish she had a little bit more of that killer instinct and a little bit more power in her punches. And then again, she's still developing her ground game as well. It's not bad, but she is vulnerable to getting taken down. And again, I think this is going to be a pretty difficult fight for her overall. So overall, I think we're going to see more dog action come in here, and the price could continue to drop on Macedo, but I think it's probably going to be the wrong way. I like Macedo to win this, but it is going to be a difficult fight. I think both these ladies are definitely going to be tough, kind of pick each other apart back and forth and really be competitive. So I could realistically see it going either way, but I'm going to side with Macedo. Despite her being undersized in this spot, I just think she's just the better fighter overall. So my pick is Macedo, but it is kind of a difficult one to bet.
Yeah, the most confusing thing for me with this fight is why did Macedo move up to 135 again? She made her UFC debut at 135 and she got completely overpowered by Ashley Evans Smith and ended up getting TKO'd. And she looked a lot healthier and in her realm at 125 and finally did pick up that first UFC win in her last fight. So I was really perplexed that this fight's taking place at 135, and she's facing someone that's a lot taller with a lot bigger reach. I think Maleki's about 5 or 6 inches taller with a 10-inch reach. So that's a concern. That's a big concern. And she's fought at featherweight, while Macedo is a natural flyweight. So huge size difference here, but the skill difference is also pretty big. I mean, on the feet, I think it's pretty competitive. Malecki does actually come from a striking background, but I really was not that impressed with her stand-up in her UFC debut. It was pretty even against her opponent, and then her opponent was able to mix in a lot of takedowns in the first round. And Macedo has a much, much better ground game than anybody Malecki's faced. So if this goes to the canvas, I think Macedo can tap her pretty quick, even if somehow Malecki gets top position. I mean, I think Macedo could throw up an armbar or something. But on the feet, I think it'll be pretty competitive, mainly because of Malecki's huge physical advantages. But I think Macedo is a lot quicker than Malecki. I think that, as Nick mentioned, like, she might be able to utilize that to get inside and land a couple shots to soften Malecki up, to open up the ground game. And once it does go to the ground, I definitely favor Macedo. I think if she gets top position, it's only a matter of time until she finds a submission here. So I think it's going to be competitive on the feet, but there's a huge difference in skill on the ground. So even though Macedo's very unsized and I'm perplexed by her moving up to bantamweight, and I hope she goes back to flyweight, I still think that she can get the win here. So Macedo's my pick. Now, dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Bruno Gustavo da Silva, who is 10-4-1, taking on David Dvorak, who is 17-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Silva open -145, Dvorak +115. This line moved all over the place. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is Silva -115, the comeback, and Dvorak -106. So line margins have to tighten up a little bit from a 30-cent line to a 20-cent line, pretty much across market price as well. And we're seeing Silva as a slight favorite. Man, this is another tough one. I mean, I know Bruno Silva is kind of the more, I don't want to say household name, because obviously he's not, hasn't had a lot of fights in the UFC or nothing, but I think he is the more hyped fighter. A lot of people are expecting good things from him, and then he goes out there and just kind of lays an egg against Taha. He had his moments in that fight for sure, but disappointing. I think Bruno Silva is a little bit up and down, and throughout his career you could see a lot of good from him, but at the same time, there's some head scratching moments in his career as well. What you see from him, he's a very solid, strong guy for the weight class. Of course, he does have a good ground game. He's got good wrestling to go along with it, underrated wrestling really. And he doesn't have bad striking either. So he's a pretty complete fighter. But I think he's going to have his hands full against Dvorak here. Dvorak's going to have a little bit of size and reach on him. I think Dvorak is probably the better overall striker in this matchup. I think he does have a pretty slick ground game to go along with it as well. So I think in this spot, Silva's probably going to look to take this fight to the floor and control Dvorak and try to make this an ugly fight. But as it progresses, Dvorak, I think, is going to be too much. He's going to be able to kind of fend off a reverse position on the ground, possibly get back to his feet, obviously, stuffing those takedown attempts, and then doing more damage along the way here against Silva. So it should be another interesting fight, because I think both these guys, again, are going to test each other. They're going to push each other to the limits here. And realistically, it's a pick-em fight for a reason. It's going to be a close competitive fight, but I'm leaning towards Dvorak here. I like what I see. The guy has, again, that length. He's got underrated power, I think, overall on the feet. He's got that killer instinct that you do like to see. I mean, in all areas of the game, I think, he's very game, and he's capable of finishing the fight as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Dvorak finishing Silva along the way as this fight progresses a little bit. So I like what I see in the debuting Dvorak here. And I expect him to give Silva a lot of fits here, and enough to probably win this fight as well. So this line, again, bouncing all over the place. There's a lot of action kind of going back and forth, because a lot of split opinions on this fight, obviously. I'm going to have to side with Dvorak, though. I think he is probably the right side here. So I'm going to pick him to win this fight as well.
Dvorak is stepping in for this fight on short notice, about a month's notice, but I really have been impressed with this guy, and he's been fighting for 10 years in Europe, and he hasn't lost in 8. So this is a guy that is very talented, and he hasn't just been fighting bums. Like, his last opponent, I think, was 16-1 or 16-2. Real quality win to earn this opportunity. So Dvorak is well-rounded. He has good striking. He has great movement. He's aggressive. He throws in combinations. He has some sneaky power with a quick right hand that he likes to lead with. There's a lot of things to like with Dvorak. I think this guy could be a player at 125, and he also has a pretty good ground game. So very well rounded. Bruno Silva will have an opportunity to get the win, though. I mean, he's no bum, has knockout power, and Dvorak occasionally is hittable. So if Silva can connect like he did in that opening round fight on Tough Brazil 4, then he's definitely got a chance to win on the feet. But for the most part, Dvorak should definitely be controlling the stand-up. On the ground, I can see Silva getting takedowns potentially, but I think Dvorak can hold his own on the canvas as well and probably work his way back to the feet. So this fight's really, really interesting, especially just because Dvorak's coming in on the month's notice. Usually you favor the guy that's been in the UFC at least a little bit longer, that has some more experience under the bright lights, but I think Dvorak is going to be just fine, especially with it being basically an empty arena. You don't have the crowd going crazy for anything Silva does that might sway the judges. So I think, head to head, all things even, this is Dvorak's fight to lose. I think he can outstrike Silva on the feet and potentially finish him there, maybe open up some cuts or something. So Dvorak is going to be my pick. Now, sticking with the flyweight division, we have Mayra Bueno Silva, who is 6-0, taking on Marina Moroz, who is 9-3. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Silva opened minus 200, the comeback on Moroz at plus 160. And right now what we're seeing over DSI, Silva minus 141, the comeback on Moroz at plus 118. So again, line margins tighten up a little bit, more action coming in Moroz's way. I understand it. I'll tell you what, man, Moroz is one of these underrated ladies for a while now. She's got a complete game overall. Coming off a very solid win over Mazo, and we saw what Mazo's capable of doing. I mean, when she's on, she's tough to beat. So I think that was a very solid win for Moroz, and it just shows what she's capable of as far as, I know she was the veteran fighter, but I'm saying improvements in her game. I mean, she's getting better in her striking skill. I think Moroz has a pretty good ground game as well. She's smart enough to get top position when she needs to at times as well. So she's just a very intelligent fighter that continues to get better, and at this point is a savvy vet. So she's facing a heck of a fighter here, though. I mean, a hungry fighter coming in, especially obviously coming into the UFC, trying to make some waves. Bueno Silva's legit. I mean, she's definitely an aggressive fighter. She goes after it everywhere the fight takes place. She's more known, of course, for her grappling style, but I'll tell you what, even on the feet, I mean, she's not afraid to bring it. I mean, she's aggressive. She pushes forward. She mixes up hands and feet pretty well. So this is going to be fireworks wherever the fight takes place. I mean, Bueno Silva has, again, a really solid ground game. She's capable of winning the fight off her back as well. So her jiu-jitsu is nothing to sleep on. But I think in this spot here, it's going to be a tough fight for her because I think Moroz might actually get top position in this spot. And I don't know if Silva can submit Moroz. I think Moroz's submission defense overall is pretty decent. So I think this is just going to be a competitive back and forth fight in all areas, but Moroz might end up actually getting top position at times as well. So that said, I'm going to stick with a vet in Moroz here. I think that it is going to be a competitive fight, but I do believe that Moroz could probably do enough to steal this on the scorecards. I don't think Silva finishes Moroz in this spot, and I think this is going to be the best fighter she's faced. So in this situation, it is going to be a difficult fight for Silva. So again, a slight lean towards Moroz here, but it will be a close competitive fight. And it is going to be in Brazil, of course, without the crowd being there. So we haven't mentioned that yet. That's going to be an interesting factor because a lot of Brazilians are on this card and they're not going to have that kind of crowd rooting for them, that adrenaline rush that they get and, that motivates you even more when you have your fans on your side screaming for your opponents to die, for crying out loud. They're not going to have that there. And so it's going to be a lot of more calm, peaceful atmosphere. So, I mean, a lot of the visiting fighters here are going to have it a little bit better, if that makes sense, but I still think, you got to kind of throw that out the window and look at how these ladies will fight and compete and I think it's going to be a competitive fight. And if it hits the scorecards, which this could possibly obviously go to the scorecards, we're going to see a very competitive decision, and you can never trust the judges if that's the case. So be careful betting this fight. There's no way I would lay chalk in this fight for sure. And I mean, that's why, again, I think people are coming in on Moroz. It's probably a dog or pass situation. It's just the matchup alone. So I like it. But again, as far as the betting window goes in confidence, I think it's going to be a split decision type of fight. So I'm going to pick Moroz, but it is kind of a competitive, tough fight to bet as well, because I mean, I could see Silva kind of coming away with this win, especially on the scorecards, if the judges kind of lean her way with a little bit more power, a little bit kind of, she's the hype fighter. Maybe, they side for the hometown fighter as well, despite no crowd being there. So if it's a close competitive decision, you never know how they're going to score it. So that's why I'm kind of hesitating on this fight overall a little bit, but I do think Moroz is the better fighter at this point of her career. So my pick is Moroz.
Yeah, both of these ladies are very talented, and I'll completely admit I underestimated Moroz moving up to 125. That was a very quality win that she picked up in that flyweight debut, and and we've seen how good Mazo is with her getting a couple wins back to back since then. So very impressed. The biggest thing with Moroz is she just needs to stay healthy. She hasn't been able to fight consistently for a while now. Mayra Bueno Silva, kind of in a similar situation. She hasn't fought in over a year either. So that win over Robertson was impressive, but you do have to remember that she was actually getting in a little bit of trouble on the ground. Robertson was in top position and was controlling her. She was doing really well. And then Silva was able to throw up an armbar and get the win off of her back. I think Moroz is going to be a little bit smarter here. I don't expect Moroz to want to play on the ground with Silva. I think in the stand-up, Moroz is going to have the technical advantage. Silva might be able to even that out a little bit by being very aggressive to make up for maybe the skill gap in striking. But Moroz, I think, has a little bit of a power edge, and she should be able to outpoint Silva on the feet. If and when this does go to the ground, as Nick mentioned, both ladies are talented there. I would say Silva's a little bit better, but I think Moroz is good enough to avoid getting tapped out if it goes to the ground. I mean, she's been on the ground with some very good fighters in the past and has been just fine. So, realistically, I think that this is going to be a competitive fight on the feet with Moroz having the edge, and I think it'll be competitive on the ground with Silva having the edge. It'll boil down to, can Silva get it to the ground? And for the most part, Moroz has showcased some relatively good takedown defense. So, and Silva really isn't that much of a wrestler. When she took the fight to the ground, or when it went to the ground, she did it by getting taken down and getting a submission. So we're going to have to see how good she is at forcing the issue, because I don't see Moroz looking to take this fight to the floor, especially if she's finding success on the feet. So I think it's going to be competitive, but I'm leaning Moroz. I think that she can win a decision here. Now, moving up to the bantamweight division, we have Hani Yahya, who is 26-10, taking on Enrique Barzola, who is 16-5-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Barzola open minus 145, Yahya plus 115. And right now what we're seeing over DSI is minus 204 for Barzola, comeback at Yahya plus 167. So needless to say, more action coming in Barzola's way. I think it's probably right. I mean, it's always difficult to bet against a guy like Yahya. Of course, Barzola dropping down a weight class. I mean, the guy's a warrior. I love watching Barzola fight because what you get from him every time out is effort. I mean, the guy is an incredible fighter. He's got that warrior spirit inside him as well. And you know he's going to come to fight, and you know he's going to give it his all. He's not going to quit on you. He's going to do his best to win the fight every time. And the guy is definitely a solid wrestler, has good striking ability, has good ground awareness, and he's putting in the work to get himself where he wants to be. So I got a ton of respect for Barzola. And he's fighting a savvy vet in Yahya that, I mean, he's given guys throughout his career fits because he's given most of the guys he's faced, I should say, throughout their career fits because of his ground game is so strong. I mean, he's got underrated wrestling, the takedown ability, unorthodox at times as well. He can backpack you as soon as he takes your neck, whether it's for a guillotine choke or, you know, he gets you from behind in a rear naked choke, you're pretty much in some serious trouble. So Yahya has that smothering game plan. And not just that, I mean, he's capable of submitting you and finishing you as well. And his stand-up is getting better, but that's not where he wants to do here. I mean, Barzola will torch him on the feet in this spot here. And that's why I think everybody's kind of coming in on Barzola. He's got the wrestling pedigree to probably keep this fight upright and keep some space. And on the feet, obviously, he's going to be able to pick Yahya apart, probably even finish him as the fight progresses. So I do think the majority of the people are probably on the right track here, coming in Barzola's way. I think he should, realistically, if he fights smart, he should get the win over Yaya. So as the fight creeps up to like 2-1, though, you got to be cautious because he only takes with a guy like Yaya one mistake. One mistake, he takes your back, a guillotine choke, whatever the case may be, and he's got that lethal submission skill. I mean, just special type of talented submission artist Yaya is. So when you're facing a specialist like that, you have to always respect it and be cautious because it doesn't matter if you're winning. I mean, 14 minutes of the fight. I mean, it could be 14 minutes and 10 seconds and that, that last 10 seconds of the fight or whatever, he gets you, whatever the case may be. That's how potent Yaya's ground game can be. But I don't think that's going to be the case for Barzola. I think Barzola is going to be able to kind of fight smart, keep him at bay, and basically beat him up here en route to either decision or finish. So my pick is Barzola. I think most people are on the right track. But again, as it creeps towards 2-1 or over, just be careful at the betting window.
Yeah, this fight's really interesting because Barzola's dropping down to bantamweight. He was always a little bit of an undersized featherweight, but he was still able to have success in the division and become a bit of a fringe contender at 145. But he eventually just ran into guys that were just a little bit too skilled and too big and too long, and he wasn't able to overcome that. And I think this has been a long time coming, him dropping down to the bantamweight division. And I think he's going to have a lot of success here, even though this division is loaded. But Yaya's no joke for a first opponent. I mean, that kind of shows what the UFC thinks of Barzola, that they're throwing him in there against a savvy veteran like this. But Barzola is way more well-rounded than Yaya. Barzola comes from a ground background with wrestling, but he has added some really good striking to his game. I mean, he has held his own on the feet with some very good fighters. And if he's able to keep this fight standing, it's not even going to be close. Yaya just does not have that standing skill. He doesn't have the power. He does have the ability to take a few shots. We really haven't seen him get hurt that much, but I just think that Barzola is going to overwhelm him on the feet for however long this stays standing. And if it goes to the ground, that's where it gets interesting because clearly Yaya's strength is the ground. He's an elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist, one of the best submission artists at 135. And if it goes to the floor, even though Barzola does have the background on the canvas, I think Yaya would completely take over. I mean, he could just hop on his back and just threaten, work for dominant positions. So what'll it boil down to is, will Barzola's wrestling background help him to fend off those takedowns? And I think that is going to be a big help, but I think more than anything, it'll boil down to, will he be conservative enough on the feet to not put himself in a position to get taken down easily? And I think that he's a smart fighter. He typically does fight with a good game plan. So I expect that Barzola is going to try to pick Yaya apart, and I think he'll have success there. And as long as he doesn't overcommit to things, he's going to be able to stuff those takedowns and keep this fight upright. And if that happens, Yaya is going to be in a lot of trouble. But if Yaya can get the takedowns, if he can secure a dominant position, then I could see Yaya winning as well. But I think that this is just screaming an impressive debut for Barzola at 135. So I think that he wins a unanimous decision, probably outpointing Yaya over the course of 3 rounds without going crazy, going for a finish and leaving an opening for Yaya. So my pick is going to be Barzola. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Eliza Zaleski dos Santos, who is 21-6, taking on Alexei Konchenko, who is 20-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Dos Santos up is -175. The comeback on Konchenko at +135. And right now, what we're seeing over DSI, Zaleski -130. The comeback on Konchenko +108. Man, this is a tough one as well because you have 2 guys coming off disappointing losses. Man, I mean, I thought Konchenko was well on his way to kind of getting the W over Burns as well. I know Burns is a tough matchup, but I mean, stylistically, if he could keep that fight upright and outstrike Burns along the way, especially Burns moving up in weight class in his last fight. So what I'm trying to say is it was kind of a disappointing head scratcher, even though Gilbert Burns is a talented fighter, whether it's at lightweight or welterweight. Obviously, I mean, the guy's a stud. So not a bad loss, but I was expecting a little bit better. But you got to give Konchenko a little bit of credit because he did come back and win that 3rd round and at least made it interesting. But that said, kind of a head scratcher because, again, he was on his way. He looks good. He's a solid striker, has decent takedown defense overall. And, I mean, he's a pretty savvy vet at this point. Even before he came into the UFC, he had a lot of experience, and you could see the skill level, and he's one of these guys that's in his mid-30s. But, again, in fight years, he's a little bit, even though he's experienced, he's a little bit younger than that because I think he's kind of still a fairly fresh fighter overall, especially in the UFC. So there's a lot to like about Kunchenko here, and I think he's going to be very competitive with Zaleski. Zaleski disappointed me against Jinglong last time. I mean, him getting finished, being a little bit sloppy as the fight progressed a little bit too, was disappointing. I mean, and of course, Jinglong just facing Magny and just getting dominated by Magny. I mean, it just makes this loss looked a little bit worse actually as well. So Zaleski was on his way though, man. I mean, the guy is so skilled. He's so talented. There's a lot to like about him everywhere the fight takes place. I mean, he's a sniper on the feet. He's got power. You have to definitely respect his stand-up game. On the ground, he's shown a lot of skill there as well. I mean, he's able to wrestle. He's able to take your back and submit you if he needs to. There's a lot to like about Zaleski. He's a very complete fighter. I think overall, he's probably the more complete fighter of the two here. So I can understand why he's favored because he can win this fight on the feet. And of course, he's got the ground edge as well. It's not going to be easy, I think, getting Kunchenko where he wants to be at times on the ground. But as the fight progresses, he could find some favorable spots for him in that regard as well. So this is tough. I mean, at the betting window, if Zaleski doesn't fight smart, I think this will be a competitive fight as the fight progresses. And if it hits the scorecards, we're going to see a split decision type of fight. I think it'll go back and forth, especially these guys both like to stand and bang. And if Kunchenko can use his wrestling and again, reverse keep this fight upright, he will have success back and forth against Zaleski. And Zaleski, again, I'm not saying he's chinny, but it's not a good look. I mean, coming in, like I said, sloppy at times and leaving himself vulnerable. I mean, Kunchenko has enough power. He could actually kind of duplicate what just happened to him last. So he was on a rise and then all of a sudden he kind of woke us up. We have to take a step back and see maybe Zaleski's not quite there yet. So, and Kunchenko, again, you can't underestimate him because he's coming off a disappointing loss either. So this fight should be competitive. It should be close. I'm going to slightly lean towards Zaleski because I think right now it's almost a good price and about right as far as the line. He should be a slight favorite in this spot. He is the more well-rounded fighter. He's got more ways to win this fight as well. So I will lean with him, but again, it's not a confident one because I think if it hits the scorecards, Kunchenko could win or possibly, catch that chin and possibly put him out along the way as well. So it's definitely a tough spot to bet, but as far as a pure pick goes, I will lean slightly towards Zaleski in this one.
And I'm in a similar position here. Both fighters are very talented. Both fighters are guys that I thought were top 15 welterweights. Zaleski, he was on a really nice streak there with some quality wins, and then he just ran into a big power shot from Li Jinglong that really dashed those dreams of him being a contender. We'll see if he can bounce back. Kunchenko was in a similar position. He looked like he was a player, and then Gilbert Burns was able to pick up a win against him in a surprise upset. So, and I, I was wrong in both of their losses. So I'm a little bit thrown off with how those fights played out. But looking at the statistics, Zaleski and Kunchenko are very similar. I mean, they both have a similar percentage of their significant strikes that are landed. They both have similar striking defense. One of the big differences is Zaleski, he is more active. He throws more often. So I can see that potentially helping him in the stand-up, but seeing him get rocked and hurt makes me a little bit nervous. So we really haven't seen that with Kunchenko. I mean, he's had a lot of success everywhere in the world until that loss to Gilbert Burns. But another thing that could be a factor here is Zaleski does have a very good ground game, that he's picked up some submission wins in the UFC, and I can definitely see him working for takedowns, mixing things up on the feet and on the ground. And if he's able to get takedowns, that should really give him an edge because on the canvas, he's dangerous. He is aggressive. He looks for submissions and he gets them. Now, I don't know how easy it would be to actually tap out Kunchenko, but I could definitely see Zaleski getting top position. And on the feet, the other big difference is I think Zaleski does mix things up a little bit better. Now, Kunchenko, I think, is the slightly better boxer, but Zaleski is the more well-rounded striker. I mean, he's throwing a lot of kicks and more diverse attacks, spinning attacks. So I think he mixes it up a lot better than Kunchenko, and he can kind of be a little bit tougher to predict what's going to happen. So if Kunchenko is able to kind of keep this in his realm, then he does have a path to victory. He also could land a big shot and hurt Zaleski, especially, who knows how good his chin is at this point after eating that huge shot. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I still think overall that Zaleski is the more well-rounded fighter here, and I see a lot more paths to victory for him, and I think that he is going to be able to just barely squeak one out, because I think this will be competitive. I think it probably goes to the scorecards, and it could be a split decision type fight, but I'm leaning Zaleski. Now, dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have Amanda Rebus, who is 8-1, taking on Randa Marcos, who is 10-7-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Rebus opened minus 325, the comeback on Marcos at plus 250. And right now what we're seeing over at DSI is minus 333 for Rebus, the comeback on Marcos plus 259. So there has been two-way action coming in this fight. It's been bouncing back and forth a little bit. But obviously Rebus is the more popular side here. I get it. I mean, this should be kind of Rebus's fight to win. I mean, Marcos is one of these fighters that is such a capable fighter, if that's the word I'm looking for, because I mean, she can compete with the best of them and hang in there and make it an ultra close competitive fight, regardless of the skill level of her competition at times. I mean, she basically has the skill to perform well on the feet. She's got the decent fight IQ most times as well. She's got underrated wrestling. She's got a good submission game. But again, she makes some mistakes on the ground. I mean, you look back at, some of her submission losses, you're kind of scratching your head. I was surprised, honestly, by some of those. But so she's inconsistent is my problem with Marcos. And I've said it time and time again. I mean, even if you look at her win-loss resume, I mean, she's basically alternating win-losses now. We say it every podcast and it keeps on happening. And she's coming off a win, by the way. So, that means she's going to lose this fight for sure. Now, obviously I'm kidding. I mean, you got to throw all that out the window, but it is kind of the inconsistency does show. So at that spot, I don't know. It's hard to trust and depend on Marcos, and Rebus obviously coming in off of a very awesome win. I mean, I don't think people expected her to dominate Mackenzie Dern like she did, and she showed obviously a little bit of everything. So Rebus is an aggressive fighter. She has capabilities on the feet. Obviously, she has an outstanding ground game to go along with it. She's an aggressive, more than capable fighter at finishing the fight as well. So I think Marcos is really going to have her hands full in this fight. And I mean, that's why you have to lean towards Rebus, because Rebus could obviously win this fight on the ground. I think her pressure and her pace, even though Marcos is going to have her moments. I mean, it's not going to be a blowout by any means as the fight progresses, but unless obviously Rebus gets her down and subs her quickly, I don't think that happens. Marcos is definitely going to have her moments in this fight. And she's going to be one of the toughest fighters that Rebus has ever faced. So you cannot count her out. And at the betting window right now, where it is again, at the price, man, it's very tough to bet. I don't think you could just go in there like crazy laying 3-1 over Rebus, because Marcos is again an established vet that has been in there with the best of the best in most cases. So, even though Rebus is another difficult challenge for her, she's going to show up and she's going to be game. So you can't go crazy laying chalk in this spot. Especially again, the state of MMA judging. If Marcos does not get submitted by Rebus and it goes to the scorecards, man, you never know. So I do think the right pick to make is Rebus in this spot. I think she's just going to be a little bit too much overall for Marcos with her aggression, with her capabilities of finishing this fight. I mean, she does have more paths to victory, but again, if it hits the scorecards, who knows what we're going to see, but I do expect Rebus to get the W here.
This is definitely a strong test for Rebus. She looked so good in that last contest against Mackenzie Dern. So I have been very impressed with what I've seen out of her. She looked good on the ground. She's looked good on the feet. She looks like she could be a player at 115. Absolutely. So, but Marcos is definitely the type of fighter that can present a stiff challenge. I mean, Marcos has pretty strong wrestling. She has respectable striking skills, and and she's a tough out. So, she's going to be a game fighter. I think she'd present a much better challenge on the feet than what Mackenzie Dern was able to present in the last fight. So, this one's really interesting. That being said, Marcos does have a history of struggling against both talented strikers and against really talented ground fighters, where she's been submitted twice Once from both times actually from after getting takedowns, where the one was Rose Namajunas, and then most recently, it was a little while back, but she did get tapped by Courtney Casey. So I can totally see Marcos shooting in a takedown and somehow getting put in a bad position and Rebus submitting her from there. I also can see Marcos getting put on her back. I mean, that happened in her last fight against Ashley Yoder. And I don't think Yoder has even close to the ground game that Rebus has overall. And Rebus is the better striker of the two. They're the same height, but Rebus has a little bit of a reach, and she knows how to use that distance. I mean, it was amazing watching what she was doing to Mackenzie Dern. I completely underestimated her skill there. So I think this is definitely an opportunity for Rebus to showcase what she's capable of against a savvy veteran UFC strawweight. But I just really think that this is going to be her coming out party, even more so than the Dern fight. So I think Marcos is going to struggle in almost every facet of the fight unless she can get top position and hold it. And I just don't think she'll be able to do that for consistent periods of time. So my pick is going to be Rebus. I think along the way she gets a stoppage, potentially by submission. Now, moving up to the flyweight division, we have Jussier Formiga, who is 23-6, taking on Brandon Moreno, who is 16-5-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Formiga minus 185, the comeback on Moreno plus 145. Right now what we're seeing is minus 145 for Formiga, the comeback on Moreno at plus 125. So again, line margins have tightened up a little bit and more action coming on Moreno. Man, Moreno's looks so good. The guy has so much potential and so much really, I mean, raw skill. It's amazing, right? He's got dangerous knockout power. The guy has a really dangerous submission game as well. Has some pretty decent wrestling at times. I mean, I know he can get put on his back too. So defensively with his wrestling is a bit of a concern from him. But as far as finishing ability, the guy has it, man. He's a fun fighter to watch. He's back on the rise. I mean, there's so much to like about Moreno. It's hard not to be a fan of his when you watch this guy fight. So this is an awesome fight. And this is a very good spot for him because if he comes in here and picks off Formiga, I mean, he'll get himself right back in the title picture because that's where Formiga is. I mean, Formiga is at the top of the food chain. He's very well respected. He only loses to the best of the best, of course. And so if Moreno is able to pick him off, I mean, this is going to be a huge win. And he has a path to victory, and that's keeping this fight on the feet and blasting Formiga, honestly. I mean, he has the capabilities of doing some damage against Formiga on the feet, of course, but Formiga's boxing's getting better, his striking's getting better, he's getting more confident in that area. Again, we've seen some vulnerabilities from him for sure, but the backpack is where it's at for Formiga. I mean, this guy is such a good ground practitioner. You know, he takes your back, you're not going to do anything about it. There's nothing you can do to escape him. I mean, he'll ride you out or submit you. That's all there is to it. He could get top position in this fight, get some takedowns, and doesn't necessarily have to get your back, but that's, he ends up transitioning more times than not to your back, and he'll win rounds that way. So Moreno is going to have to really avoid the ground scrambles and ground positioning in this fight if he's going to win it. He's going to have to keep his distance, keep his space, and try to land the big bombs on Formiga. I mean, obviously early on in the fight or early on in the rounds, that's where it's going to be for him. He's going to have those opportunities, and that's what makes this an intriguing fight. I understand why everybody's coming in kind of betting Moreno more so than Formiga. It just seems like that's kind of the trendy, popular side right now. I'm going to actually go the other way and pick Formiga to win. Because again, I think he can make this kind of one of his typical backpacking type of fights and just control and smother and possibly submit Moreno, along the way. So I am going to pick him, but it's another tough spot to bet. But as this line drops, I mean, if this gets close to exactly a pick'em type of fight, there's no doubt you have to take Formiga. I mean, like I said, right now we're looking at it and we're seeing a drop in price, but I still think it's probably enough to keep me away. But if you're talking about this line going to minus 120, minus 130, I think there is probably a bet to be made on Formiga at that time. But again, it depends on where the line goes. For me, as far as a pick goes, though, I am going to pick Formiga to win. I mean, I think Moreno has to kind of get over that hump. And if he's able to do that, then of course, I mean, there's going to be more upside to him for sure. So it's a big fight for both gentlemen. If Formiga wants to stay relevant, he's got to beat a guy like Moreno. If Moreno wants to take his spot and keep on climbing the ladder, he definitely needs to get this win as well. So important fight for both gentlemen, but I still have to side with Formiga here.
And I have to agree. I know that Moreno is super talented. He's a decent grappler with some big time power on the feet that has pulled off some impressive performances inside the octagon. But Formiga is the type of fighter that kind of represents what it takes to beat Moreno. Moreno struggles against a strong grappler that can take advantage of his weaknesses in grappling defense. Moreno had troubles against Pantoja. He's had trouble against Sergio Pettis taking him down, and I think he's going to have trouble with Formiga shooting for takedowns and putting him on the ground. And I think Formiga is probably the best ground fighter of all three of them. So, and then with Formiga having added some improvements to his stand-up skills, I think that's going to make it even tougher for Moreno because, he's still going to have an opportunity to get a TKO because Formiga does have a bit of a susceptible chin. He's been knocked out by Joseph Benavidez twice. He's been hurting before against other fighters, but unless Moreno completely destroys Formiga on the feet and finishes him there, it's only a matter of time before Formiga closes that distance. And as Nick said, he backpacks you. I mean, he's so good at getting fighters to the ground and taking their backs. He's not always going to be able to get the finish, but if he's in an elite dominant position, he's going to be riding out rounds and winning decisions as well. So, like I said, Moreno's got a puncher's chance. He's dangerous. He has the power in his hands and feet to finish this fight at any moment's notice while it's standing. But if he's not able to do that, if he misses that shot and Formiga ducks it and drags him to the canvas, that round's over. I really think that's what's going to happen. I just do not see Moreno working his way back to the feet. He's going to be losing rounds due to Formiga's ground game. So I do think Moreno's the more well-rounded fighter of the two, but Formiga's one big strength is enough to overcome that. So Formiga's going to be my pick. Now moving on to the main card and kicking things off in the lightweight division, we have Francisco Trinaldo, who's 24-7, taking on John Makdessi, who is 17-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Man, this is really an interesting fight. Trinaldo open -200, the comeback on Makdessi at +160. And right now, what we're seeing over at BetDSI is actually, let me see, he got away from me here. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Trinaldo's -149, the comeback on Makdessi +120. So line margins have tightened up a little bit more action coming in Makdessi's way. Across the Don Best screen here, it looks like it's about 155, 160-ish as well. So market price is about steady right now. And I'll tell you what, it's a tough one because both of these fighters have been underrated throughout their careers, really. I mean, Makdessi, we know what you're getting with him. I mean, he's a striking-based fighter. That's where it's at with him. I mean, he's got that karate point fighting style that's a sniper type of fighter, though, too. It's not just necessarily a point fighter that has no power. I mean, this guy hits you with his kicks. He can do some damage. He darts in and out. He's got that precision. He's got that power. He's got that accuracy that does do damage and is very effective with his striking for sure. Now, of course, as time goes by, he's a little bit more susceptible to getting hit. I mean, he's got a jaw broken not too long back, a while back against Cerrone. So he's definitely getting clipped in fights as well. And Trinaldo has that kind of power on the feet to make things interesting for sure with Makdessi. I mean, the guy's not a bad striker in any means. I think Trinaldo's actually the more well-rounded and the better fighter in this spot here for sure. I mean, because he's got the wrestling. He's obviously got, like I said, the striking that can actually do some damage alongside Makdessi as well. And then, of course, as far as a pure submission game, Trinaldo has the edge there as well. So the more complete fighter is the older fighter here in Trinaldo. But that being said, I still think this is going to be a difficult fight for Trinaldo because I think Makdessi is capable of using that speed and that unorthodox ability to kind of appoint Trinaldo and land those shots and do some damage along the way. And I think Trinaldo's going to have kind of a hard time keeping up with Makdessi's striking. And Makdessi really has solid takedown defense overall. So I don't think Trinaldo's going to be able to just grab a hold of him and take him down and keep him there. If he does, though, Trinaldo obviously can have a lot of success and definitely make life miserable for Makdessi, maybe even submit him. So that's going to be the key here. Can Makdessi keep off his back? Can Makdessi kind of keep Trinaldo in his range where he wants to be to land those shots and get in and out and just fight a very smart fight and win it. I think he probably can, but again, it can't be a real confident pick because you're facing or you're picking against a more complete fighter in Trinaldo here. So I can see Trinaldo has path to victory here in this spot for sure as well, but it's just such a weird spot for me that I'm actually going to pick Makdessi to kind of outpoint Trinaldo on the feet again, kind of bust him up, maybe even get a finish on the way because Makdessi does have that sniping style that if Trinaldo's eating a lot of shots or just a clean shot here, I wouldn't be surprised. Trinaldo's tough though. He's not a easy guy to finish for sure. But again, styles make fights, and this is an interesting stylistic matchup for both guys, really. So I think it's probably a dog or pass situation. That's why you're seeing a lot of the action coming in towards Makdessi here, more so than Trinaldo. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some bets coming back in on Trinaldo as well, but I do think it's a dog or pass situation. My pick will be Makdessi, and hopefully he gets it done.
And I'm going to come in the other way. Trinaldo, I think, just hits a little bit harder. I think that he's a little bit more active and he mixes things up better. Makdessi, I feel, is the better technical striker. I feel like if this fight is at a slightly slower pace and Makdessi's able to keep his distance, then he will be able to find his moments because he is the slightly more accurate fighter. He does have slightly better striking defense. And but with the way that Trinaldo fights, if he can kind of force Makdessi into a more of a brawl, then I think that is to his favor because Trinaldo is so tough. I mean, he can take a shot, and even though his age is getting up there, he just is not slowing down. And the fact that he mixes in takedown threat with the striking, because if it's just a pure stand-up fight, unless it's a brawl, I definitely feel like Makdessi would win. But with Trinaldo mixing in, getting more than one takedown per fight on average, and I mean, Makdessi does not want to go to the ground. He wants to stand. He's never even attempted a takedown in his entire UFC career. So if this fight goes to the floor, it's going to be Trinaldo initiating that, and I think that he should, because on the feet, while I do think that Trinaldo is pretty underrated there, I think Makdessi just is the better stand-up fighter. Makdessi does have a little bit of vulnerability with getting knocked out by Lance Vanetta and getting his jaw broken by Don Cerrone. So Trinaldo, with his power, could definitely land a big shot and hurt Makdessi there as well. But like I said, for the most part, the stand-up exchanges should belong to Makdessi because of his technique advantage. But if you factor in Trinaldo's power and Trinaldo's takedowns and a little bit of top control, potentially looking for a submission attempt or just ground and pound from top position, I have to favor Trinaldo. Just, he has a few more ways to win. And I just can't trust that Makdessi's going to stay upright at distance and keep this as a technical kickboxing style fight. And, cause if he does that, he can win. But I just don't think he's going to be able to do that for a full 15 minutes. So I'm going to side with Trinaldo, especially being in Brazil, even with no crowd there. I think that he'll still be fired up fighting in his home country. So I think Trinaldo can win a decision here, so he is going to be my pick. Now, moving all the way up to the light heavyweight division, we have Johnny Walker, who is 17-4. Taking on Nikita Krylov, who is 26-7. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Here we go. Probably the sleeper fight of the card. I mean, of course, all the diehards and everybody that follows the sport knows this fight's going to be fireworks. I mean, somebody's going to go down here for sure, no doubt about it. I mean, both these guys are dangerous strikers. Obviously, Walker is offensively, man, the guy's a beast. I mean, I know he's coming off of a devastating upset loss. I mean, to most people, they were scratching their heads how Corey Anderson was able to knock him out that way. But I mean, Walker is kind of chinny. I mean, that's his flaw. That's his kryptonite for sure, is he is a chinny fighter. And I mean, that Anderson knockout wasn't a fluke. And that's what you got to worry about with Johnny Walker. And Krylov, man, if you got a suspect chin, I don't know if Krylov's the guy you want to be in there against. I mean, the guy very underrated across the board. I think he's getting better. I mean, I understand he's coming off, both these guys are coming off losses, of course, right? But Krylov against Glover, I mean, obviously Glover's kind of a declining type of fighter. He's not at the top of his game anymore. So you'd expect Krylov to come in and probably do pretty well there. But again, we've seen Glover, I mean, just be one of those gatekeepers and just pick off all these guys that are kind of, supposed to surpass him at this point of his career. So that's not necessarily a bad loss is what I'm getting at with Krylov. I think Krylov has been improving his overall game. I mean, he redeemed that OSP loss, which was huge, I think, for his confidence overall as well. And I think he's one step away from really being thought as a serious potential contender. I mean, the guy has all the skill. Like I said, he's the more skilled fighter overall here in this spot. I mean, the athleticism of Walker is phenomenal. So Krylov definitely has to be careful here. But I think on the ground, Krylov is a little bit better, obviously. Walker's tough to hold down. I mean, tough to take down and hold down at times as well. But I think that Krylov can have some success on the ground here in this spot, but I think more than likely we probably see these guys throwing on the feet. And if that's the case, I mean, obviously both of these guys are, like I said, dangerous strikers capable of doing great things. I mean, Walker, you talk about unorthodox and dangerous. I mean, and it's not flukish. I mean, when this guy lands on you, I mean, he does have that accuracy and he does have that power. I mean, he's going to put you out. So, I mean, again, Krylov is a pretty tough guy overall. He's not an easy guy to finish. But, I mean, he has to be careful here because Walker lands on you. I mean, obviously, you see people crumble under that power. So, offensively, Walker is a beast. He's no joke in this spot. But I just think the better, more well-rounded fighter in this spot, again, is Krylov. And I think he's got more paths to victory in this fight. If it hits the scorecards, which it's not going to hit the cards, I think Krylov probably edges out a decision win here. But again, it's probably not going to hit the cards. I could see Krylov winning inside. I could see Krylov probably knocking Walker out or stunning him and maybe hopping on a submission as well. So either way, I do think it's a dog or pass situation. I think you can make a case for Krylov being favored in this spot here. But again, you do have to respect Walker. He's a dangerous fighter. And really, I mean, he's one of the most dangerous light heavyweights in the world for sure offensively. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But can you depend on that chin? And can you risk laying a little bit of chalk over another dangerous fighter like Krylov? I don't think so. Like I said, I think you can make a case for Krylov being favored in this fight. So I'm going to pick him to win, and it is a dog or pass situation.
When I initially looked at this fight, I was like, oh man, Johnny Walker, he's going to win easy. But the more I thought about it and the more I was actually breaking it down, the more I liked Krylov. Walker, I mean, I thought that he was going to be a potential contender at 205, and he still may be someday, but there are some big flaws with his game. He really doesn't have much of a ground game, and he does have a very vulnerable chin. I mean, Corey Anderson doesn't have power on the feet. He's not a great striker, but he was able to hurt Walker on the feet, and he followed through and was able to put him away. And that wasn't the first time Walker's been knocked out. That was the third time he's been knocked out. He was knocked out by Wagner Prado of all people before he made it to the UFC. So, Walker does have some issues with chin durability, and that has not really been the case with Krylov. And the only time Krylov's ever been finished from strikes was basically due to exhaustion in his UFC debut. So and that was at heavyweight. So I'm going to put that one aside. And, I mean, Krylov can take a shot. And while Walker is still extremely powerful and he can hit you with all different sorts of attacks, whether it's elbows on the inside, big crazy spinning attacks from distance, or just pure punching power, in the pocket. I think Krylov can take Walker's best shot, and I do not think Walker can take Krylov's best shot. Plus you factor in that Krylov, while his biggest path to getting defeated has been against good grapplers that can submit him. That's not a part of Walker's game pretty much at all. So, if and when it goes to the floor, I think Krylov's going to be the favorite there. I think he has the better wrestling and the better ground game, and while he gets submitted, he also is pretty good at submitting people. So he'll have the ground advantage as well. And on the feet, Krylov mixes things up pretty well. I mean, he's knocked people out with knees. He's knocked people out with head kicks. His hands are pretty heavy. So, yeah, I really do actually think that this favors Krylov. I mean, there's just way more paths to victory here, where Walker typically is just trying to knock people out, and Krylov is tough to knock out. So I really like Krylov here. The more I think about it, the more that I'm big time on Team Krylov. So, I'm going to side with Krylov. I think that he can win on the ground. I think he can win by TKO on the ground. I think he can win by submission. I think he can win by knockout. I think he could win by decision. So, yeah, Krylov's going to be my pick. I just think it's going to be too tough for Walker to knock him out the way that he wants to, because Krylov's so tough, and every other path to victory screams Krylov to me. So Krylov's my pick. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Renato Moicano, who is 13-3-1, taking on Damir Hadzovic, who is 13-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Moicano open minus 325, the comeback on Hadzovic at plus 250. And right now what we're seeing is minus 345, the comeback on Hadzovic at plus 271. Tough one, man, because I think Moicano shouldn't be this high of a favorite. Hadzovic is getting a little bit disrespected here in this spot. I mean, Moicano is by far the better fighter. I understand that. I mean, in every area, but really, the last couple fights we've seen from Moicano has been disappointing. I know he's lost to absolute studs, so you can't really blame him there with Aldo and, the Korean Zombie or whatnot. But, the way he lost those fights it is disappointing. He's got to tighten up that defense a little bit, and he's got to be better. I mean, because offensively, the guy's just a beast. I mean, he's a smart fighter overall. Offensively, he can mix things up really well. He's dangerous on the feet. He's got that knockout power. Again, he's got that accuracy and precision as well. He's got an outstanding ground game. He's got good wrestling. So this guy is a very complete fighter, and he's capable of winning fights in every area of the game for sure. And he is better than Hadzovic, right? So, I mean, this guy gets his offense flowing. I understand why he's a solid favorite, but 3-1 coming off those losses. Hadzovic, he's been up and down, of course, as well, but I think he does have at least enough knockout power in his hands, where Moicano is, again, defensively not at his best. I mean, Hadzovic might land. I mean, he could be losing this fight and just blast him. So Hadzovic is a pretty well-rounded fighter in his own right. It's not like he's, out of his realm in anywhere the fight takes place. I mean, he has a pretty solid ground game. Defensively, he's got pretty decent takedown defense overall at times as well. So, I mean, there's a lot to like about him. And again, I think he's probably getting a little bit disrespected at the current price here. But it's hard to pick him here because Moicano is the better fighter, and he has to get back on track here. I mean, Moicano, in my opinion, was on his way to a title shot and potentially winning that title. I mean, that's how good this guy could be. But I mean, now obviously things have changed with the last two losses. I mean, especially like I said, I don't trust his defensively. I don't trust him that much right now. And of course, I mean, he's susceptible to the body, of course, but Jose Aldo, those body shots are just vicious though. And then of course he got clipped in the chin the very next fight. So, again, Moicano's kind of a head scratcher to me right now. It's just a little bit disappointing. I wasn't expecting him to have those losses at least that drastic. So, that definitely dropped his stock a little bit in my eyes. And I think Hadzovic, again, with that disrespect here, he could be the sleeper dog of this card. I mean, I'm not going to pick him to win. I think you have to go with Moicano. He is the better fighter, but this is definitely one I'm not willing to lay 3.5 to 1. That's almost market price on right now. I think you guys need to stay away from it. Or if you're going to take a fun stab at the dog, or, possibly Hadzovic inside or something in a prop, maybe that's a way to go for maybe a fun TV bet. But outside of that, stay away from this fight, man. It's just kind of a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, I'm not worried at all about Moicano moving up a weight class. I mean, he was very talented at featherweight, and the only people that beat him were some of the best of the best there. And he was a pretty big, long featherweight. So I think moving up to lightweight is going to be just fine for him. And in fact, it might actually help with his one area that was a concern, which was his chin. Perhaps not having to make such a devastating weight cut will strengthen it a little bit. He'll be able to take a bigger shot, even though he's going to be facing guys that maybe hit a little bit harder than he faced at featherweight. So I think this is a positive move for him. It clearly was looking like he wasn't going to be a contender at featherweight because of his losses to some of the best guys there. But this is a very winnable fight. I mean, Moicano is way more well-rounded than Hadzovic. I mean, Hadzovic has power on the feet and he's a decent striker, but Moicano is the more well-rounded striker, and I think the more active striker. I think his defense is a little bit better, although he does seem to get clipped a little bit in every fight and get bloodied up a little bit. So I'm a little concerned about that, but for the most part, Moicano should win on the feet, and if it goes to the ground, he should definitely win on the ground. I mean, he's going to have a huge edge there. and he's very dangerous on the canvas, a very strong grappler. So, paths to victory for Hadzovic, I really think the only path for him is knockout, which isn't impossible. I mean, we've already seen Moicano get TKO'd or knocked out in back-to-back fights, including a very quick loss to the Zombie. So, while Hadzovic definitely does have a path to victory here, I just think Moicano's too talented, and I expect him to bounce back. This definitely feels like a bounce-back fight. He's not facing a player at 155 at this point. They're working him in to the lightweight division after he was consistently taking on some of the best in the world at 145. So, very winnable fight for Moicano, and I think he gets the job done. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets a stoppage, but I think the more likely outcome is he's a little more cautious and is able to walk away with a decision. So Moicano is going to be my pick. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have a battle of grapplers as Damian Maia, who is 28-9, takes on Gilbert Burns, who is 17-3. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Battle of the grapplers here, with Burns opening -150, Maia +110. I mean, obviously both of these fighters have evolved into more just BJJ fighters, but these are two elite grapplers, two of the best the sport's ever had. I mean, in the octagon for sure. That's the level of the jiu-jitsu skill you're going to see here. But obviously, there's a difference between the two, and it's Maia hasn't, I mean, even though his striking has gotten better through the years, it's not where you want it to be for sure. And Burns, man, I mean, he does show flashes of really good stuff. Obviously, working with the crew in Florida. I mean, his team, his camp has obviously gotten him a lot better in that regard. And his stand-up is nothing to take lightly. I mean, the guy has power on his feet. He's getting more confidence. I mean, defensively, again, there is a little bit of concern with Burns because he's been clipped, and you can get through that defense at times, but he doesn't really have to worry about it too much with Maia here. I mean, Maia has that old man strength that if he lands on your chin and you're not careful, of course he can hurt you, man. I mean, so don't count him out completely. But as far as a striking matchup goes, Burns is going to torch Maia. Maia does not want to play that game here in this spot. What he wants to do is make this a grappling battle, as crazy as that sounds, because nobody wants to make it usually a grappling battle with Burns. But I think Maia could probably have success here. Again, I mean, taking kind of a page out of Formiga's book, backpack a guy like Burns possibly. Not going to be an easy thing to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if Maia does control this fight a little bit more on the ground. I mean, these guys are not going to submit each other. The only way they do, I could see Burns maybe submitting Maia if he almost has him nearly killed on the feet. If he knocks him out and Maia's about to just, go out cold and he hops on a quick sub or something like that, maybe. But that's the only way these guys are going to submit each other. I mean, they're that good on the ground. So I'd be shocked if either one of them gets a submission here. So it's really going to play out where I think Maia's going to try to get the control of this fight. He's going to probably not want to keep space here. He's not a dumb fighter, man. He knows what he has to do in this spot. Obviously, Burns has a blueprint he could follow from some of the guys that have been able to keep their distance and kind of outpoint Maia and be cautious by doing so. I mean, Maia's lost to the stud elite wrestlers in the division, right? Those are really the only guys that have been able to deal with him. Outside of that, I mean, even Ben Askren, for crying out loud, another stud wrestler. I mean, Maia was able to finish him as well. So, I mean, Burns has that path to victory, but he doesn't have that elite level wrestling. So I think he might have some problems here against Maia. Even though Burns' takedown defense is improving, he's not an easy guy to take down. I still think the way Maia goes about his takedown sometimes, I mean, he doesn't have the orthodox, wrestling double leg or anything like that, or the trip takedowns at times. He can even get your back, as I say it time and time again on this podcast. I mean, you could be kind of pushed up against a cage and he'll find that angle and take your back from the cage or whatever and get you down on the ground. So there's all sorts of ways Maia could close a distance and get this fight to the ground, and unorthodox ways as well. So that's where his path to victory is here. Just make this a slow, ugly, boring type of fight is how he wins it. And if it hits the scorecards, I think he probably can get it done. So really, if Burns wins this fight, I think it's probably more likely. I mean, he can win on the cards for sure because he could probably keep his distance and just land the better strikes along the way. But I think realistically, if it does hit the cards, Maia probably wins this fight. And I do think that Maia's kind of a tough guy to finish, and he's going to give Burns a lot of fits. So even though the price has been bet up, I mean, from -150 right now, we are seeing, like I said, -192. The comeback right now on Maia's +160. So the betting public overall is seeing the striking differential here. They're seeing that these guys are both elite level grapplers, and they're favoring Burns to get it done here. But I think they're kind of underestimating Maia in this spot as well. So I will go against the grain, and I will pick Maia to pull off this upset win here. And it should be an interesting fight, to say the least. So if Burns does pull it off, though, man, hats off to him. If he could get a win over Gunnar Nelson and Damian Maia, I mean, in this weight class, that says a lot for Burns, and he's well on his way. If he could tighten up defensively a little bit, man, that guy could be wearing UFC gold at some point. That's how talented he could be. But we'll see if he gets there. And it starts by obviously winning this fight against Maia. I'm not sure he could do it. I think Maia might make it his type of fight and get the win here. So my pick is Maia.
And I'm actually right with you. Now, in terms of well-roundedness, Gilbert Burns is the more well-rounded fighter. I mean, he's showcased that he has some strength on the feet. He's powerful. He's improved his striking technique. I mean, he has had some issues on the feet in the past with clipped by some good strikers as well, but that's not Damian Maia. I mean, there is no chance that Damian Maia is going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Burns on the feet and live. I mean, Burns just has too much power there. Burns has the good technique, and Maia exhausts himself when he tries to stand and bang too much. So, on the feet, this is definitely Burns' fight. So what happens when it goes to the ground? And if and when it goes to the ground, I mean, you have to favor Maia. No one has ever been able to hold their own with Maia on the ground. I mean, he has been in there against some great fighters on the canvas, and every single time he ends up winning on the ground. I mean, he just has that elite submission ability. He comes at you from the southpaw style, which is very unorthodox on the canvas. People aren't typically ready for it. I mean, you can train as hard as you want, but when he's doing everything from the opposite direction, I mean, it can really catch you off guard. And, I mean, he is just so extremely talented on the canvas. Now, Gilbert Burns is a great grappler. I mean, against, I would say 98% of the fighters in the UFC at lightweight or welterweight, I would favor him to be able to out-grapple them. But Damian Maia is that, 1 or 2% because, I mean, makes things effortless on the canvas. Whether he's working for setting you up to roll right into a triangle choke, or he's setting up a rear naked choke, taking your back, or you name it. I mean, he gets the job done. And he kind of finds that strength, and he has those unorthodox takedowns. I mean, he's not shooting in for a power double, but if he can close the distance against Gilbert Burns and get a hold of him and drag this to the floor, and using those trips, using a single leg, using whatever, again in the clinch against the fence, if he can get Burns in that type of bad position, even with how good Burns is on the ground, I just think Burns will be put in a bad position. I can see Maia taking his back or even attempting submissions possibly. I mean, I think it'll be tough because Burns is so good on the ground, but I just believe in Damian Maia as an elite grappler, and I don't think Burns' takedown defense is good enough here. So, and also, we really haven't seen people aggressively look to grapple with Burns. I mean, I think the last person that I remember really doing it was Alex Oliveira, of all people. And he had brief success and then ended up getting caught after he was beating Burns. But this time around, I mean, this is somebody that really knows what they're doing. So, I really think Burns' takedown defense is going to be, a little bit lackluster here. And I expect that Maia is going to be able to put him on the canvas. So, Maia is going to be my pick. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening in the lightweight division, we have Kevin Lee, who is 18-5, taking on Charles Oliveira, who is 28-8. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Oliveira open minus 140, the comeback on Lee, even money. And right now what we're seeing is Lee minus 145, the comeback on Oliveira plus 121. So the line flipped. A little surprised Oliveira opened the favorite. I mean, I know the guy's been on fire recently. The guy's been amazing. I mean, to me, let me just say this. He's been one of the most frustrating guys as far as the betting window goes in a while, because man, there's been times that this guy, I know what kind of skill he has. He's one of the most dangerous submission fighters in the sports history. I mean, we're just talking about two elite level grapplers in Burns and Mayra. And you know what? I mean, other than, look, Oliveira, I don't think matches up with those guys, but in the cage, in the octagon, as far as jiu-jitsu goes, I mean, he's arguably more dangerous. I mean, at catching people with subs. I mean, that's how good he is. Again, I'm not comparing him to Burns and Mayra overall jiu-jitsu, because those guys will school him on the ground. Obviously, they're different, situations, different weight class, whatever. But I'm just saying, in this spot here, Oliveira is definitely one of the all-time greats in getting submissions in the UFC. The guy takes your neck, takes your back, you're done, man. I mean, so that's where it's out to Oliveira. He's getting better in his striking too. We see that. I mean, finally he's getting some confidence. He's getting some size as he grows into, he grows a little bit. Obviously, as the years go by, he's growing into that physique a little bit more too. So he's getting more powerful. That's why he's having a little bit more success, I think, also on the feet. So if he clips you, man, these days, I mean, he does have some power behind that, even though he's got kind of a skinny looking frame, right? So again, Oliveira's ground game though is where it's at with him. Now, the inconsistencies though of him, some of the losses that he's faced in his career. Now, I know it's been a while, but he does have that quit in him. And that's what frustrates me with Oliveira. You see all this skill, all this talent, all this potential, and then he goes out there and lays an egg sometimes, and you're scratching your head like, what? How did you lose this fight? Or you can tell in certain spots where he knows the going's getting rough, and he just kind of bolted it, and he just kind of gave up and quit. That's what I think. Now, we haven't seen that from him for a while, so maybe he's over that hump a little bit. But I don't know, man. I'm not sold on him quite yet. I mean, he's going to have to continue to roll out some of these solid victories. And obviously Kevin Lee would be one of those, for me to be a believer in him again. I'm actually going to go pick Lee in this spot, because I do think Lee has more upside here in a way. I think Lee's going to present Oliveira a lot of problems if he fights smart. I mean, the problem with Oliveira, for Lee here in this fight, is Oliveira, I mean, it only takes a second for him to, again, you make a mistake, he hops on your back, grabs your neck, and you're done. So, and Lee can definitely get submitted here in this spot against Oliveira. But if he fights smart, which I think Kevin Lee knows what to expect here, obviously in this spot here, he could keep that distance a little bit. I think he's the better striker on the feet. I think Oliveira's a bit chinny himself as well. Kevin Lee has a little bit of confidence. Obviously, his striking is getting better. He's got that power to put Oliveira out. He's got that wrestling to keep this fight upright if he's smart and doesn't let Oliveira take his back. So honestly, I mean, the line flipping from Oliveira being favored to Lee being favored, I understand it. I think Kevin Lee should be a slight favorite in this spot. So the opening line, I think, was wrong, even though Oliveira can win this, and obviously you have to respect him here. If you're going to bet this fight, you have to kind of bet Oliveira either obviously by submission or inside the distance, because maybe he does, land on Lee's chin. He's a little bit of a suspect chin as well. I mean, both these guys tend to slow down a little bit. I mean, I'm worried more about Lee's conditioning actually than Oliveira's in most cases. So that said, I mean, that's why if you're going to bet this fight, I think you just have to take Oliveira inside. If you don't have inside offered at your book, then take a small stab at submission if you're going to bet him. But outside of that, I think Lee could probably get this fight done as well. I wouldn't even be surprised if Lee finishes Oliveira by submission, as crazy as that sounds. I know that's probably not going to be a popular opinion, but we've seen Oliveira defensively have struggles. I mean, offensively, it's where it's at with him, but defensively, he can be submitted. Lee does have a great rear naked choke. I mean, he's not a fish out of water on the ground by any means. So the guy has skill. I mean, honestly, if anything, Kevin Lee's been disappointing. I think Kevin Lee, really at times you expect a lot from him, and he lets you down as well. So I get it, but I don't think he's got kind of that quit in him like Oliveira has showed in the past. And I think this matchup here for Lee is actually a pretty good one, and he can kind of derail the little hype that Oliveira has, or that momentum he has going for him right now as well. But I mean, realistically speaking, these guys can finish each other. There's a lot to question about each guy as well, but there's also a lot to like, and that's why they're headlining this card, obviously, because these guys are ultra popular. They're amazing to watch. I mean, they're fun to watch. If you watch these guys fight, obviously there's not really a dull moment in a lot of fights. So this is going to be an exciting matchup. I'm glad it's a main event. It should be a fun fight, but it is a difficult one again to bet. Because again, if you're laying too much chalk against Lee, it could go right out the window with one submission from Oliveira. So the price is where it's at. If you see this price dropping back down towards more of a pick'em type of price, you got to hop on Lee, I think. But if you see this price obviously continue to escalate a little bit Lee's way, then the value probably opens up on Oliveira a little bit as well. But again, if you're going to bet this fight, if you're betting Oliveira, I would bet the prop more so than the straight bet here. So my pick is actually going to be Lee. I think if he fights smart, he's going to show that he's a better fighter in this spot, and Oliveira's quite not ready. He's not just there yet, but I mean, obviously Oliveira gets his win. I mean, a lot of good things ahead for him as well. So my pick is Lee. Hopefully it's an awesome main event. I think it has fireworks written all over it. I don't see it letting down or disappointing, so should be a great one.
And I agree that this fight is going to be extremely exciting. I mean, Both guys are extremely talented. Both are players at 155. Both could be contenders. And we've already seen Lee fight for an interim belt and come up short. We have not seen Oliveira quite make it to that level, but I mean, he is riding a huge wave of momentum right now, having won 7 in a row. That being said, of those 7 in a row, still really looking for that first big quality win. And granted, it's 6 in a row actually for Oliveira. He's beat some decent fighters, Giagos, Clay Guida, Jim Miller, Tamer, Nick Lentz, Jared Gordon, but still no like signature wins against like a top 15 lightweight currently. So this is a huge opportunity for Lee because, he's come up short. For Oliveira, because he's come up short when he's faced top contenders in the past. Whether it was Jim Miller during Miller's prime, whether it was Donald Cerrone, whether it was Frankie Edgar or Cub Swanson or Max Holloway or Anthony Pettis or Lamas or Paul Felder. I mean, he just time and time again against the best of the best, he has come up short. But something seems a little bit different. Now, granted, he hasn't been facing the best of the best during this 6-fight win streak, but hasn't just been winning on the ground. Yeah, he does have 4 of those wins from his submission skills, but his last 2, he was able to showcase his stand-up. He's showcased some serious improvements in his power, in his striking technique. I mean, he's been taking dudes out. So I think that is really important for him, because if he isn't able to get this to the ground and take advantage of Kevin Lee's susceptibility to submissions, then he needs to be able to stand and bang with them. And I think that he'll be able to. Neither guy has the greatest chin. I mean, we've seen Lee get blasted by Edson Barboza. We've seen Lee get knocked out by Leonardo Santos. So I know that if the right shot lands from Oliveira, that he can hurt Lee. But we also know with what Lee just did to Gillespie, which was unbelievable. I mean, it wasn't just that it was a good head kick. He set that head kick up perfectly. And I've made fun of Lee's striking in the past, saying that he just feels out of the water and there's just nothing there. But he definitely has made some serious improvements in his stand-up. So on the feet, I think this is going to be very competitive, where either guy could land a big shot and win. And on the ground, Lee's definitely the better wrestler of the two, and he has the much easier path to taking it to the floor if he wants to. But does he really want to? Because Oliveira has so much of a threat on the canvas. Now, he's not nearly as much of a threat when he is put on his back. He's definitely more of a front runner on the canvas, trying to put opponents in a bad spot. But if Lee, I mean, we've seen already Lee get submitted by shooting in for an over-aggressive takedown and then getting like triangle choked by Tony Ferguson. We've also seen Lee get put in a bad spot by Dos Anjos. So it's worked both ways with him. But Lee does definitely have the wrestling edge here. He's a little bit physically stronger, I would think, but we've seen Charles Oliveira really pack on some muscle recently. So I think that he'll be a little bit more able to go toe-to-toe with Lee on the ground, and just in terms of pure physical strength. So I think this fight's going to be super competitive. And then another thing you have to factor in with 5 rounds, I think Oliveira does slow down a little bit. Like, he fights at such a high pace that if he isn't able to get the finish, we've seen him struggle. I mean, that happened against Paul Felder. He was very aggressive early. He was looking good, but Felder was able to fend off those submission attempts. And then by the midpoint of the second round, Oliveira was fading and Felder was able to take him out with ground and pound. So I could totally see Oliveira starting really strong here and then not able to get the finish, and then Lee taking over. But I can also see Oliveira just starting strong and overwhelming Lee and taking him out. So I think this is going to be a really fun fight. This is a great main event. It's tough to predict. I'm totally with Nick. I think the line is set pretty well. But I am going to side with Charles Oliveira. I think that at some point he does either win by knockout or submission, whether it's a big right hand or potentially catching Lee with something on the canvas. So Charles Oliveira is going to be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on ESPN Plus 28. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.